KFMB News presents San Diego, 1961.
KFMB News has selected 10 stories which, in its editorial opinion, were among the top developments of the year. Each one will be reported by a member of the KFMB News staff. In just 1 minute, Harold Keene will talk about the problems at the Civic Center in 1961.
San Diego Civic Center was a battleground during much of the year, and many of the skirmishes centered around the office of City Manager George Bean, who went down to defeat with his ouster in September. Bean's principal adversaries were the top officers of the Better Government Association, M.J. Montroy, shown here, and Peter Burnham. Their target was not only Bean, but the entire city manager form of government itself. When Bean, as past president of the International Association of City Managers, was accused of being part of a virtual communist conspiracy to destroy local government, he had this to say.
Well, the inference was made, Harold, that the City Managers Association was subversive. This was made by one of my visitors. It wasn't made by the other. Of course, this is an obvious untruth, and the background of the City Managers Association is one long record of trying to improve local government.
The Better Government Association had earlier overextended its hand by unsuccessfully attempting to recall Mayor Dale after a heated inquisition by Montroy over possible connections of the mayor with property near Brown Field. Dale reached a boiling point in this highly emotional meeting.
We're trying to recall you on the taxes that will go in on one item here alone that'll break the backs of the people, and that's the development of the Brown Field, your own baby.
But don't accuse me of any unethical or dishonest practices.
The grand jury subsequently cleared Dale of any evidence of personal gain in advocating Brown Field as an international jet-age airport. But other squabbles got the city administration in hot water with highly vocal pressure groups. The newly formed Balboa Park Protective Association protested at public hearings proposed changes in the park and obtained enough names on petitions to place a measure on the election ballot aimed at limiting the council's power to make such changes. This proposition was defeated, but the administration's enemies succeeded in ousting two incumbent councilmen with the election of Alan Hitch and Helen Cobb. They were joined by another newcomer, Harry Scheidel, and forces were set into motion which inevitably led to the dismissal of George Bean. Two major setbacks hastened the city manager's ouster in September. Council at a public hearing rejected a proposal Bean said would save the taxpayers $1 million a year, the merger of police and fire department functions. Then he was blamed by his opponents for an $8 million error in engineering estimates on the metropolitan sewage system, although the entire responsibility was taken by the private engineering firm retained by the city. Its spokesman, Dave Narver, explained it in this manner.
This is just a matter of misjudgment on what it's going to cost per unit foot of pipe. We knew it was going to cost more than any ordinary pipe. At that time, we didn't put enough in per unit foot. The ocean outfall, the big unknown there was the hardness of the rock. The reports didn't come in until February of this year, which was long after the bond issue had even been voted on, so that this in itself has caused quite an increase in cost.
Despite strong support of Bean's administration by a group of San Diego's leading citizens in a statement to the council, the city manager was dismissed after less than 4 years in office, and his youthful assistant, Tom Fletcher, was appointed. Fletcher said he would attempt to improve the public relations of his office while pushing to completion major projects started in Bean's administration, including the sewerage system and development of the downtown Center City complex of municipal buildings. It was a hectic year at Civic Center, perhaps indicative of the growing pains of a dynamic city groping for progressive methods.
Biggest crime story of the year was the prosecution of the Anthony Alisio kidnappers. November 22nd, 1960, the 41-year-old wealthy San Diego sportsman was kidnapped from the driveway of his home. Within 2 months, 7 suspects had been rounded up and a trial date of March 2nd set. On the day before the trial, 26-year-old Roy T. Gadigan turned state's evidence, leaving 6 defendants. Jury selection took 12 days. On the 15th of March, Gavigan led the long procession of prosecution witnesses that ultimately totaled more than 100. He identified 31-year-old Frank Maroney as the brains behind the plot that was successful in obtaining $200,000. Gavigan testified Robert Gorman was one of the two men who actually carried out the kidnapping. Richard Hoffman was the other kidnapper who joined with Gorman. Gavigan also identified his brother-in-law, Richard Clavesia, as one of the original plotters of the crime. Maroney's wife, Selma, and Gorman's wife, Ruby, were also charged with taking minor parts in the plot. On April 13th, the jury took the case, and Hoffman pleaded guilty. Following 4 days of deliberation, the jury found Frank Maroney and Robert Gorman guilty of both conspiracy and kidnapping for the purpose of ransom. Ruby Gorman was convicted of conspiracy. Selma Maroney and Richard Clavesia were acquitted. Gavigan, Maroney, Gorman, and Hoffman went to prison. Mrs. Gorman was granted 20 years probation. The kidnap case of Tony Alisio lasted nearly 5 months, was prosecuted by District Attorney Don Keller, and cost taxpayers an estimated $143,000. This is Phil Stewart, KFMB News.
An event that had almost comic overtones occurred in mid-June of 1961 when FBI agents captured 51-year-old Bernard Browse and 23-year-old Dale Jensen aboard a luxury yacht in Ensenada Harbor. The bearded Browse and his young companion were arrested in connection with the dynamiting of communication relay towers in Nevada and Utah the month before. Browse, the man who plotted the dynamitings, he and Jensen carried them out. Authorities identified Browse after examining hundreds of letters attacking the American Telephone and Telegraph Company. The yacht on which the two were captured was loaded down with weapons ranging all the way from machine guns to hand grenades. Both men freely admitted the dynamitings, identified themselves as members of the American Republic Army, dedicated to the overthrow of the government and fighting monopolies such as the Telephone and Telegraph Company. There were only 2 members of the so-called Army, Browse as the leader, Jensen the follower. Both were sent back to Nevada for trial and subsequent imprisonment. And this is Nick Gearhart, KFMB News.
San Diegans were shocked in February to hear that a policeman fatally shot a 16-year-old girl. Dead on the sidewalk at 6th and Ash was Mary Jane Osuna, 2150 Ocean View Boulevard. However, a coroner's jury ruled the shooting of Mary Jane justifiable homicide. 26-year-old Clayton L. Proctor, the patrolman who fired the fatal shot, was the first to testify. He examined the male clothing worn by the female Osuna. Also shown was the holster in which Mary Jane carried a knife with a 5-inch blade concealed on her person. Proctor testified he thought Mary Jane was a boy. He demonstrated how she lunged at him in the dark of night with the knife. Mary Jane's mother sat through the day-long hearing. She sued the city for $501,000. This was later dropped. One of the Osuna girl's female companions that night was dressed as a boy, as was the victim. 17-year-old Kishka Ivor Gross was sent to the Youth Authority, but was at large and sought by the police. Kishka testified but broke down on the stand and fainted when she left the inquest room. A third companion, 16-year-old Virginia Stack, was dressed as a girl. She denied that Officer Proctor told them to stop, also denied he was forced to retreat from the knife lunge. Otherwise, both Kishka and Virginia's stories agreed with the one told by the policeman. Investigator of the shooting, Sergeant Cody Isbell, testified that Proctor had acted in self-defense. Isbell said the officer's only alternative would have been to turn on his heels and run. The Osuna case, one to be long remembered after the year 1961. This is Jim Price, KFMB News.
The arrival of the submarine Diadon on the evening of June 30th brought to an end a terrifying ordeal at sea for a 14-year-old boy from Huntington Beach, California. Young Terry McClellan's mother was the first aboard to greet her son. He had just been rescued by a fishing vessel and then transferred to the submarine after 3 days adrift on an open raft. Terry's grandfather and a friend had died before his eyes as they floated in rough seas after their albacore fishing boat sank in a storm off Baja, California. The KFMB newsreel camera recorded the dramatic scene as Terry related what had happened.
And then my grandfather started going crazy after he saw Al. And later that night, the raft turned over again, and my grandfather fell in the water, and I had dozed off for a minute, and he was screaming and yelling, and he finally woke me up, and he was about 20 yards outside of the raft, and I dove out of the raft and went over and brought him back to the raft and got him back on the raft and kept telling him, "Don't die, Grandpa. I don't want you to leave me here alone."
The effort to talk about the deaths and the rescue finally became too much for the 14-year-old, and the doctors made him stop. Terry had lost 10 pounds during those harrowing days at sea, but with the resiliency of youth, he soon recovered and returned to school this fall. However, he'll never be able to completely forget those 3 days off the coast of Baja, California.
And he had been getting...
I think that's about it, gentlemen. We appreciate it.
1961 gave birth to an activity which for the past several decades has been the sole province of fraternities, sororities, and youth groups in foreign lands unhappy with their lot. The activity? Demonstrations. They dealt with the sale of surplus jet aircraft to communist Yugoslavia under the terms of an agreement framed during the Truman administration, forged during the tenure of Dwight Eisenhower, and enforced during the Kennedy regime. Marshal Tito would receive several TB-2 jet trainers. The demonstrations against the State Department policies were the basis for the formation of a group in San Diego known as Patriots Unlimited. Their first mass demonstration, held in October at the downtown plaza, complete with signs, loudspeakers, and speeches. Patriots Unlimited expanded their activities to the waterfront to protest a shipment of jets aboard a Yugoslavian motor ship. A second ship due in port in November, the Gundulik, and this time Patriots Unlimited took to the water. Scores of private vessels formed off Ballast Point. The Gundulik came in at high speed, escorted by a cordon of Coast Guard cutters. To an uninformed spectator, the demonstrations had all the outward appearances of an aloha party. The signs "No to Tito" and "Jets on Jets" showed the true feelings of the demonstrators. The last shipments of jets went to Yugoslavia just before Christmas, and a token demonstration was formed. San Diego can look forward to more of the same in future months. This is Don Ross, KFMB News.
The year 1961 will long be remembered by San Diego reservists called to active duty to meet the Berlin crisis. This is the destroyer escort Wiseman and her 80-man reserve crew as she prepared to hit the high seas to stand ready if called upon to check aggression anywhere against the free world. The conversion from civilian to military life meant a trip to Fort Lewis, Washington for some 100 reservists of San Diego's 977th Transportation Company, and some of the men aren't too happy.
I've been in the service now for only 10 months, but we are a transportation unit for a terminal service, loading and unloading of cargo ships, and I have not yet seen a ship since I've been in the service. Also, we were supposed to be called to prevent a war instead of fight one, but sheer numbers do not make up an army, as we have fought other wars, and we've always been outnumbered 8 to 1, 10 to 1. But that was with training. Now, if we were to be put into combat now, I don't feel that any of the reservists called up would live through the fighting because of the lack of the training facilities.
I believe that the housing facilities are inadequate, the heating is very inadequate and irregular, the chow is sloppy as far as I'm concerned. As far as training, I haven't had any. We have no equipment, the weapons are obsolete, and I just can't see that we're being properly trained at this time.
I can see no basis at all for the complaints that have been flying around and the calling in of the senators, congressmen, and that sort of thing. To me, it's a pitiful example when an American has to call on his congressional representatives to get him out of the service, so to speak.
President Kennedy said recently, depending on the course of world events, the men should all be home before their full year's duty is out, all except the old sergeant, and he said he prefers to stick around for a while. Gene Jenkins, KFMB News.
In January 1961, the communications media, civic organizations, civic-minded individuals got behind a move to convince Baron Hilton, owner of the Los Angeles Chargers, to move his American League franchise to our town. Favorable letters, ticket requests came in by the thousands. On January 24th, Attorney Sullivan, owner Hilton, outlined the conditions under which the Chargers would move to San Diego. On February 9th, the City Council approved a final contract with the Chargers by a vote of 5-2. And the next day, the Charger executives moved their offices to San Diego and the Lafayette Hotel. In July, the squad opened preseason practice at the University of San Diego. while Balboa Stadium was being enlarged and renovated. On Sunday, August 6, 15,000 fans filled the available seats to see the San Diego Chargers win their first game against Houston 27-14. It was the beginning of a wonderful season that saw local crowds of over 34,000 watch the Chargers win 15 in a row. The Western Division Championship brings San Diego a multitude of national publicity on television and radio, in newspapers and magazines, with the culmination last Sunday's nationally televised bruising championship game in Balboa Stadium. This, one of San Diego's top news stories of 1961.
Tangible evidence of the growth of San Diego was everywhere in 1961. Highway construction went at a record clip, with $30 million in new highways and freeways under construction. 19 miles of new freeway was building in the county, including 3 major jobs on downtown 101, totaling $16 million. This 4-level interchange at the southern entrance to Cabrillo Freeway is scheduled for completion in spring of 1962. 2 giant shopping centers were finished and opened for business in 1961. The 80-acre Mission Valley Center opened in February and already has announced expansion plans. The Grossmont Center in La Mesa opened in October on a 110-acre site. Each shopping center has 50 stores and boasts parking for some 5,000 cars. November saw the dedication of the $1 million El Cortez Convention Center, which should give a real shot in the arm to San Diego's third largest industry, tourism. Perhaps the outstanding indicator of growth in San Diego in 1961 were announcements that new skyscrapers will soon appear on the downtown skyline. San Diego hasn't seen a single new office building built since 1928, but in 1961, plans were announced for 6 large-scale downtown structures. The collective cost of these buildings, $50 million, and would provide more than 1 million square feet of new office space. Included are the 17-story, $8 million United California Bank building at 3rd and B, the Home Federal building at 8th and Broadway, 18 stories at $6 million, and the United States National Bank building at 2nd and Broadway, slated for 25 stories at a cost of $11 million. These buildings, coupled with the proposed $46 million Center City complex of municipal buildings, would give an almost complete new face to downtown San Diego. This is Bill Stiles, KFMB News.
1961 saw the arrival in San Diego of the largest Navy ship ever to visit the West Coast, the aircraft carrier Kittyhawk, now a San Diego-based addition to the Pacific Fleet. The Kittyhawk and her 3,000-man crew were greeted by whistles, horns, sirens, water-spouting fireboats, and thousands of spectators as the ship glided into the harbor. This was at the conclusion of a round-the-Cape shakedown cruise from the East Coast. The $250 million floating fortress relies on maneuverability and a top speed of more than 30 knots to defend against surface and submarine attack. Rather than relying on conventional firepower, the Kittyhawk carries missile batteries which can fire automatic radar tracking Terrier missiles at a rate of 1 every 8 seconds. The Kittyhawk boasts 4 of the world's largest elevators. Each one of them can carry 4 of the Navy's heaviest jet bombers from the hangar deck to the flight deck in 15 seconds. The ship is laced with literally miles of corridors, including 2 90-foot-a-minute escalators used to speed jet pilots from below up to the flight deck. 2 weeks after her arrival, the Kittyhawk participated in combined Navy-Marine maneuvers off the San Diego coast. Her canted-deck design allows launching and recovery operations to be conducted simultaneously. The Kittyhawk's combat capability was demonstrated in this launching of 40 jets in less than 24 minutes. Foreign observers joined ranking naval and marine officers in their praise of a display of firepower that literally shredded a target sled towed only 500 yards off the carrier's stern. Admiral George Anderson headed the official contingent viewing the maneuvers as a stand-in for President John F. Kennedy. The president had canceled plans for a San Diego visit for the maneuvers in order to attend the funeral of the late Speaker of the House, Sam Rayburn. A big San Diego welcome for the Kittyhawk, the largest ship ever to visit the West Coast and part of a growing U.S. naval might.
Those were the top 10 stories of the year in the opinion of the editorial board of KFMB News. But there were other happenings, too, stories which deserve a place in our review of the year. In mid-June, it was a 3-alarm fire that destroyed the Guardian van and storage building at 10th and J Streets. 200,000 pounds of household articles valued at $250,000 went up in smoke. More than 60 firemen fought the blaze at a time sent flames licking 100 feet into the air. A murder trial with all the drama of a Perry Mason thriller took place in February. There was only one important difference. The defendant was found guilty. Dapper La Hoyan Robert Dalton went to prison for the murder of his wealthy employer and companion, John R. Larendon. Another major crime story of 1961, the slaying of Tijuana newsman Carlos Estrada Sastre, a crusading columnist for the Tijuana daily newspaper Noticias. Estrada was beaten to death with a heavy weapon at the doorway to his hotel room late one night. When the public clamored for justice, 4 men were arrested and the Tijuana police chief was fired. One of the 4, Nicolas Guerrero, is said to have admitted the crime, though Noticias editor Jose Carduno says the arrest is just a cover-up. A year-and-a-half-long series of burglaries in San Diego was climaxed this year with the arrest of a distinguished 45-year-old man. Robert K. Seitzinger was charged with breaking into more than 50 homes and making off with about $50,000 in cash and valuables. He was dubbed the pack rat burglar because he'd often return things of sentimental value. $10,000 worth of loot was recovered with his arrest, and he explained he selected his victims from the society pages. Dramatic news pictures at the Laurel Street Bridge. 2 young Marines sat on the ledge of the bridge, and it looked as though they were ready to jump. Traffic on Cabrillo Freeway beneath was stopped while Police Sergeant J.C. Slack did some fast talking. After half an hour, the Marines crawled to safety and were quickly nabbed by police. When the Russians set off a 50-megaton atomic bomb, stories of civil defense and radioactive fallout topped the news of the day. The Lakeside Union School District was already at work on a huge fallout shelter big enough for 420 children. A lot of other San Diego residents listened to talk of community shelters, but decided not to wait. They called in construction crews and began building their own underground shelters in front yards and backyards. Members of the La Jolla Town Council listened to an ambitious plan proposed by a weapons system expert, Floyd George Steele. Steele suggested a tunnel running almost the full length of La Jolla, big enough to accommodate all residents and costing about $7 million. Those with only a few dollars in their pockets were eyeing such things as this radiation fallout suit that cost $27. The weather made some headlines, too. Water spouts snaked their way through the Oceanside Carlsbad area early one Sunday morning. Several roofs were ripped off, trees were uprooted, and small boats were blown helter-skelter. Luckily, no one was injured. Earlier in the year, Lakeside had some weather problems, too. A tremendous cloudburst sent torrents of water cascading down Quail Canyon Creek. The banks overflowed, the result, a huge lake. Flooded homes, and water everywhere. The plush La Jolla Mullins area came in for trouble just before the end of the year. An earthslide demolished one $35,000 home and flattened 7 other unfinished houses. Whenever news was in the making, KFMB newsmen were at the scene. This was the scene at an El Cajon Boulevard liquor store moments after the night clerk stopped 2 bullets fired by a would-be robber. After wounding the clerk, the gunman fled without taking a cent. Sheriff's deputies swooped down on a group of teenagers threatening a gang war near Lakeside. 16 youngsters were taken into custody and their weapons confiscated. Clubs, chains, knives, and pellet guns. They said the feud was over 2 girls. Other stories that made the news included babies born at home, triplets, that is, in Tijuana, and dogs, and prize-winning cats, yo-yo contests, and high-flying kites. Priests were ordained. The small fry modeled hats. There were bubble gum contests. And the diver who dropped 100 feet into a flaming tank of water. And how about Navy frogmen who trained like frogs in the mud? And hundreds of San Diegans who were honored for their achievements, for their contributions to the community, for their unselfish efforts toward building a better San Diego. And there was a story of the Marine Corps' smallest Marine. Despite his pocket size, he proved that he could do everything his bigger buddies could do. Private Larry Talbot was only 4 feet 11, and some said he'd never measure up. But Private Talbot proved what determination can do, and he graduated with flying colors. And that's the story of San Diego, 1961. We hope that you and yours will have a happy and prosperous 1962.
San Diego 1961 has been a KFMB News presentation.